Hello everyone, welcome to New Gen Politics. So many of you may have seen there's kind of an ongoing conflict between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. This came to a head recently when Tucker Carlson had Candace Owens on his show and they were taking pot shots at Nick Fuentes. However, Tucker won't debate Nick Fuentes. He won't even interview him. He won't have him on. He won't associate with him. And for somebody who says he has never really seen him, he seems to have a lot of strong feelings about him. So Nick made a response video. He basically tears into Tucker Carlson and explains how he is the future voice of the right. He is a much better leader to young, disaffected men. And the clip I want to show you is a clip of actually the political streamer, Asmongold, who agrees with what Nick Fuentes said. So let's take a look at this and then talk about it.
I think this is what's happened with a lot of different voices on all types of the political spectrum, is that you have somebody that wants to ask questions about like obvious inconsistencies or problems, right? It's things like, for example, how is it America first if we're doing things that are in Israel's best interest? That is a legitimate, real question. It's not an anti-Semitic question. It's not an illegal question. It's not hate speech. It's genuine, honest, reasonable, and fair. And if you can't ask that question and they can't answer that question, that says a lot more about them than it does about you. Why is he so personal about this? Well, because Tucker Carlson called him a little gay boy from Chicago. I mean, I feel like that's kind of fair, right? I mean, you want to be personal. Personal is going to go both ways.
Israel last year, and I sacrificed, and I was targeted by the ADL, by the SPLC, by the federal government, by the conservative movement that both Candace and Tucker were a part of. Candace and Tucker had nothing to say about Israel until it became unavoidable last year. Not popular, but unavoidable. And now they want to gatekeep me out and do this personality attack and say I'm a bitter loser in my basement from Chicago. I'm a kid from Chicago. And they slipped up there because they forgot for 1 second that they're pretending to be the spokesperson for exactly that kind of person. Tucker's mask slipped, and he forgot for a minute that for 8 years he's been pretending to care about the plight of weird kids in their parents' basement who are broke and didn't go to an Ivy League school, living in cities that don't matter like Chicago, not like Washington, D.C. or L.A. or New York.
I think Nick is right about this, by the way. He is. And the fact is that there's a lot of guys out there, and this is where you're seeing a lot of this online resurgence and a lot of this online right-wing tilt. I think it's primarily from disaffected young men. Primarily. And you see this constantly.
So two major points that Asmon makes in agreement with Nick. First is that on both sides of the political aisle, you can't just ask obvious questions. They want you to be silent. They don't want you to ask the obvious things. Ask a question in good faith and expect a good faith answer. You know, both establishment political parties don't want to do that. They don't want to answer those questions. And so they make it taboo, or you can't say it, or you're racist or anti-Semitic. And that's simply not the case. And the more they say that, the more people think they're hiding something, or they don't have a real, true, meaningful agenda. They don't have an agenda that represents them. And we're seeing that on both sides of the political aisle. The second point he made is that a lot of the online conversation that's pushing the country further right is from these disaffected young men. And you can see that play out in the statistics. Young men are moving crazy far to the right. Young women are actually moving further to the left. You're getting this gender split up in Gen Z, and it's probably going to continue to Gen Alpha and who knows from there. But it is concerning, but it's also true that the young men are kind of taking the reins of where the politics of this country are going. And they need somebody who represents them, who's like them. Now, you can have somebody who doesn't know exactly what your life was like, who hasn't lived it. That's why people loved Trump, right? He was the people's billionaire. He didn't pretend to know what it was like to be you. He just understood your struggles. He didn't talk down to people in his own constituents. He talks down to a lot of people, but I mean, he didn't talk down to his own supporters. He didn't belittle them. He didn't call them dumb and lazy and stupid like a lot of politicians like to do. He simply said, I understand what you're going through. Fortunately, I didn't have to go through those problems. I'm sure he had his own problems growing up. Everybody does. But so Nick is making that argument is like, hey, you guys are out of touch. And it's not only because you haven't lived this life, it's because you're not listening to the people who have. That's the difference between a good leader who may not have gone through those circumstances and a bad leader who hasn't gone through those circumstances. Is one listens to the people who has. He doesn't have to agree with everything. He doesn't have to take what they say at 100% face value, but you have to listen to people. And if a lot of people are saying the same things, there might be something to that. But it seems Tucker and Candace don't want to talk about it. They don't want to represent those people. They want to distance themselves. You can make that obvious comparison with Nick Fuentes, where they don't really want to touch him. They don't want to interview him. Candace just finally was basically culturally forced to have a discussion with Nick Fuentes, and it didn't go very well for Candace. And I think Tucker's probably afraid of the same thing. Nick Fuentes is a remarkable debater. He is really, really good at it. And he knows his facts. He knows his stuff. And so when you have him go against people who their ideology is not airtight, you're going to have problems. And that's why people like Ben Shapiro won't debate him. Jordan Peterson won't debate him. They'll take pot shots at him, but they won't actually debate him. And they want to distance themselves from him. But in doing so, they have isolated him and his audience, which is growing massively. You know, he gets tens of thousands of views on all of his streams. And Asmon, who's now, you know, not exactly plugging him, but is at least willing to talk about him and say he is right on this point and this point. Asmon's the biggest political streamer. He gets, you know, tens to hundreds of thousands of views on his streams. The more that popularity goes up, the more Nick is going to attract that base and grow it. The Asmon video as of I'm recording this, which it hasn't even been 24 hours since that's been out, he already has 800,000 views on it. It's going to be probably several million. And people will look at that video, whether they're conservative or not conservative, whether they like Asmon, whether they just clicked on it because Nick was there. A lot of people will see that and say, okay, well, Nick makes some good points here. Other people might be attracted to that. And so Nick's audience continues to grow. He continues to outlast a lot of political speakers on the right. And the more they try to isolate him, the more it kind of has the opposite effect, because the disaffected go to who acknowledges that they're disaffected, who actually says, I understand your struggles. I want to help you. I want to represent you. They flood to people like Nick Fuentes. And they're not flooding to Candace and Tucker. And instead, Candace and Tucker, when they do, Candace and Tucker say, well, get away. Actually, we don't like you. We don't want you here. We don't want you in our movement. And so all the young men, which is the future of the country, are moving to one side of the political aisle. This is why I've said repeatedly, this kind of Republican Civil War that's going to happen, this breakdown. You see more and more political correspondents on the right basically like falling out of favor with the public. Even to the point that, you see it with Jordan Peterson, his refusal to accept Christ, Ben Shapiro in his undying support for Israel, no matter what they do. You have like Ted Cruz, who was the darling of the right in 2015, get absolutely embarrassed in his interview with Tucker Carlson. You know, incredible negative backlash for that. You see these people on the right kind of like slowly over time fall out of political favor. You get, 5-10 years shelf life, and then you're gone because your ideology doesn't keep up with how fast things are moving. And you have people who are trying to stay up with it, like Tucker Carlson or Charlie Kirk, who capitulate on ideas they had a year ago. And they don't give clear explanations to the changes in their thought process, really. They kind of just say, well, I believe this now, because it's too unpopular to not, right? Charlie Kirk finally had to start giving some criticisms of Israel, because at every single one of his rallies, all the young men would say, what about this with Israel? Why do we support them if they do this and that, He finally had to say, okay, well, you can say you don't like Netanyahu, or you can say you don't like the Israeli government. And this isn't all about Israel. There's other, problems as well. And the same thing on the left, too. You're seeing the same sort of thing where the establishment who doesn't, actually address certain issues, they're going to get thrown out as well over time. The parties are shaking up like crazy. And so when you have this shakeup and, you know, your political correspondents, the people you listen to and follow start falling out of favor more and more, you get new voices. Well, Nick is a new voice in the scene, relatively, right? He's done this for several years, but we're not talking about a lifelong career like Tucker Carlson. And so he is gaining that audience more and more, and he seems to be outlasting these people. And he's on the forefront. Like he has broken barriers that has allowed a lot of the speech that happens on the right now to be said. Him and Trump both did that, right? Trump was the first mainstream person to talk about this a lot, and then Nick Fuentes was the first person to really have a good, you know, centralized worldview, good constructed arguments, well-constructed arguments, able to explain things in a, you know, way that is not talking down to people, but it's not unsophisticated. He does a very good job at debating, like I said, and he's a bit of a showman. He's good at it. So Nick has been on the forefront of a lot of this stuff, and so everybody kind of grabs onto the coattails of where the right is going. Nick's leading. They're maybe in the middle of the pack, like Charlie Kirk, trying to get ahead of things, but they just can't, or they're getting dragged along. And the further right the country goes, the more questions they ask that these people don't want to answer, the more out of favor a lot of these political leaders will fall. And remember, he's still banned on like half the platforms. They just won't let him on. Some allow clips of him, but they don't let him stream on these platforms or make videos. So he's still like a social pariah, yet his audience continues to grow. People don't just click on him because it's convenient, right? You're going through YouTube and you're like, oh, I see a Michael Knowles clip. I'll see what he has to say. No, for Nick Fuentes, you have to seek him out if you want to watch the full-length videos. You know, you got to trek through the internet jungle and find his videos. You go to Rumble, you know, kind of a pain for people who don't use it. But his audience is still growing. And when people like Asmon, you know, make clips of him and say that, okay, he has a good point here or there, it just increases his popularity. And the more out of favor these other people fall, and they're not falling out of favor simply because Nick Fuentes is saying these things. It's like they're shooting themselves in the foot. They refuse to move on with the times. They refuse to answer questions that are tough about their ideologies. And so Nick just outlasts them. And so I think he's the future of the party. I think it's, you know, the Gen Zers are finally getting their chance to be speakers. They're getting their opportunity to enter politics. They're farther right than I think the greatest generation, which is like the furthest right generation in recent history. I mean, recent as in like a century. But they're just moving further and further right. And these other speakers aren't keeping up. And when they insult him and try to push him away, it doesn't really do themselves any favors. They just look like cowards who won't debate him. You know, I don't think you have to debate everybody. Not everybody is a debater. But when you take pot shots at people constantly, you know, you're not just one criticism. They're like attacking his character. And like when he's getting personal, when Tucker Carlson is just making these like random accusations, you know, calling him like a weird little gay kid in his basement, like, okay, then debate him. If he's that far beneath you, if he's that much of a social pariah, if his ideas are so bad, that they're easily dismissible, go ahead and debate him. Or are you afraid you'll lose? So that's my thoughts on this. If you made it all the way through the video, I appreciate it. If you like the content, like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. And thank you for watching.